I think that the significant thing for this week is that Saturn turns direct toward the end of the week. Actually, I think technically the direct turn is on Saturday morning, but with outer planets, the change of direction is so slow that in this entire 7-day period of time that we're looking at, from October 30th all the way through November 5th, Saturn only moves 1/60th of a degree. I mean, that's like it might as well be stationary all week. And of course, the a fundamental concept in astrology is that the slower moving the rhythm, the stronger or the more momentum or potency that has. That's why Pluto transits are so intense compared to moon transits, because the moon moves so much faster than Pluto. When a planet changes from direct to retrograde or retrograde to direct, it has to slow down and stop and change direction. Of course, it doesn't really, it's just an optical illusion, but it's the way it appears to us. Now, when Mercury changes direction, we all notice it because it changes so quickly. It's like being in a Porsche going 70 miles an hour, slamming on the brakes and throwing it into reverse. You're thrown around, you know it. But when the outer planets change direction, they do it. It's like more like being in an 18-wheeler in a parking lot, crawling along, and then all of a sudden it slows down, it stops, and it changes direction, and you might not even notice. However, as it slows down, it has to stop, and Saturn is basically stationary all week. And when Saturn is stationary, it's like the weight of the world gets heavier. And so for that matter, for that purpose, the theme for the week is to keep your feet on the ground, because that's what Saturn is gravity.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to your weekly astrological weather. I'm so glad that you've decided to join us today for a glimpse into the astrology of the week of October 30th to November 5th with master astrologer Rick Merlin Levine. Rick, recently I didn't introduce you with Merlin in your name, and somebody in the chat called me out like, he's the Merlin. Why are you saying that? So I'm making sure I'm saying it here.
Well, I think you know that, but Merlin is actually my legal middle name. It's on my passport and my driver's license.
I do know that.
Yeah,
It's
but I
it's
don't flaunt it. Everyone else does.
it's fun for us too. All right. So we are going to be diving into the week ahead here very shortly. Before we do that, I have to let you know about a couple things. Number one, Rick's next class with us here at Astrology Hub. It is unlocking the magic of harmonic aspects, revealing your chart's hidden dimensions. Rick, do you just want to give us a couple lines about the class and what people are going to be learning?
Well, yeah, I think this is part of the larger shift of astrology's move into depowering the patriarchy and and recognizing more soulful, embodied, matriarchal approach to astrology. When you divide the circle by 12 and you come up with squares and trines, they manifest physically. But when you divide a circle by fives or sevens or 11s, they're trickier because they don't manifest physically, but they're just as important. And so rather than looking at harmonic charts, which is confusing for many people, we look at harmonic aspects. So we're looking at a regular natal chart and some of these other aspect series, and it's just magic. Once you begin to use them, you can't ever go back. It's like realizing you've been doing charts for 20 years without Saturn and then discovering, holy crap, Saturn, it really works. That's how cool they are. So that's the short version.
Amazing. And we've had Clarissa Dolphin on the weekly weather quite a bit over the last few months. And I know she's looking at harmonic charts, but if any of that the harmonic conversation has been interesting to you, but you want an easy starting point to dive into harmonics, this is going to be a good place to start, right, Rick?
Yeah, Chris Brennan has said that sun sign astrology is the gateway drug to real astrology.
Hmm.
Well, harmonic aspects are the gateway drug to vibrational astrology or harmonic charts. So it's a little bit easier to grasp, and for chart interpretation work, it's a lot easier for people who have not made that leap to integrate some of this into their work without a lot of bending of their own mind.
Okay, great. And if you want to join us for that, it's open now, astrologyhub.com/harmonic. Go check it out. Join us. We'd love to have you in class. Students in the class will have an opportunity to get selected for the live chart reading demos if you want. You don't have to, but you can submit your chart and Rick's going to be reading charts live. So it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to get a reading with Rick Levine, but he will be reading students' charts to demonstrate the things that you're learning in the class. So that's another perk of being a student here this time. The other thing is we do have two sponsors for this show, Astro Gold and Solar Fire. They are helping to make it possible for us to continue offering all the amazing free content that you love here on the podcast. And I know that Rick, you use both of these softwares,
I
correct?
do. I do. And
Why?
I've used both for a long time. Look, there's a lot of really good programs out there. And if you're using one of those other programs and it's working for you, maybe I shouldn't say this, but that's great. Use them.
Yeah.
However, for me, SolarFire is very flexible. It's very graphical. It's easy for me to get the information that I want. SolarFire has been around for a long time. And it's my program of choice on my desktop and laptop. However, because SolarFire doesn't run on mobile devices, I use Astro Gold, which is also available for the Macintosh, for the Mac. But I use it on my iPad and on my Android phone and on my Android tablet. So yeah, I use all of those, well,
Fantastic.
both of those, I guess.
All right. Well, we're partnered with them. You can get a special discount when you sign up for either one of those, Astro Gold or Solar Fire. You have to go through the link in the show notes and enter the discount code that we've also put in the show notes, and you'll get 15% off when you sign up for Astro Gold or Solar Fire or both. All right. So, Rick, let's talk about the week ahead. What are we looking at thematically? What is the overarching anchor for us?
Well, there's kind of, as always, different things coming from different directions. But, you pressure me into kind of making a singularity out of the complexity.
I do.
And so I play your game. And and I think that the significant thing for this week is that Saturn turns direct toward the end of the week. Actually, I think technically the direct turn is on Saturday morning, but with outer planets, the change of direction is so slow that in this entire 7-day period of time that we're looking at, from October 30th all the way through November 5th, Saturn only moves 1/60th of a degree. I mean, that's like it might as well be stationary all week. And of course, the a fundamental concept in astrology is that the slower moving the rhythm, the stronger or the more momentum or potency that has. That's why Pluto transits are so intense compared to moon transits, because the moon moves so much faster than Pluto. When a planet changes from direct to retrograde or retrograde to direct, it has to slow down and stop and change direction. Of course, it doesn't really, it's just an optical illusion, but it's the way it appears to us. Now, when Mercury changes direction, we all notice it because it changes so quickly. It's like being in a in a Porsche going 70 miles an hour, slamming on the brakes and throwing it into reverse. You're thrown around, it. But when the outer planets change direction, they do it. It's like more like being in an 18-wheeler in a parking lot, crawling along, and then all of a sudden it slows down, it stops, and it changes direction, and you might not even notice. However, as it slows down, it has to stop. and Saturn is basically stationary all week. And when Saturn is stationary, it's like the weight of the world gets heavier. And so, for that matter, for that purpose, the theme for the week is to keep your feet on the ground, because that's what Saturn is gravity. They say gravity, it's not just a good idea, it's the law. And so with Saturn, it's kind of that rule, it's the law, and we have to respect it, even though as we do the day by day for the week, we'll see that there are some things going on this week that are pulling us off into the clouds or into some other places. And yet Saturn is going to be ruling the planetary roost, that is, this week.
When you say keep our feet on the ground, what do you mean? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I think it's pay attention to what's real, take care of business. Saturn likes it when we take care of business, when we're responsible. I think that Saturn often has to do with what is real, although the problem with Saturn being real, I remember Rob Hand many years ago wrote that we used to believe that Saturn was reality and Neptune was illusion. Whereas now in the modern world, we realize that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion there was one. So I know that's confusing, but over time, what happens is um, we confuse what's true with that which is real. Because over time, things change very gradually, almost too slow for us to notice. Nevertheless, when Saturn's stationary, when I say keep our feet on the ground, what I'm really saying is maintain a center of gravity, maintain balance, because Saturn, take care of business, do what is, if you have responsibilities, own up to them and follow through, because that's what Saturn likes. When we pay homage to Saturn, what we're doing is we're having integrity, we're being real. And at the same time, during the week, we have some Jupiterian and Neptunian stuff that's kind of pulling us off into the ethers. And even though we may want to take some of those journeys of imagination, we need to still remember that ultimately we have to pay attention to Saturn. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in trouble.
Love it. Okay, that's very helpful.
And
Let's
remember, we're coming off of eclipse season,
right.
and there's a larger swing of things as Saturn turns direct this week. We're coming out of a period of time where everything was retrograde over the summer. We had Mercury and Venus and Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron were all retrograde. And now Pluto has already turned direct. Pluto turned direct back in early October 10th. And now Saturn turns direct on November 4th. And then as the year continues, Neptune will turn direct in early December, and then Chiron will turn direct in late December, and then Jupiter will turn directed by the end of the year. And so as Saturn is holding on, getting ready to move forward, even though it's not moving forward, we're feeling like we're actually at a turning point, and yet we're not going forward at the speed we want to. And yet things are definitely not, we're not held by the past as much as we feel we might have been over the past months, over the past 6 months, maybe even over the past few years.
Mm. And you just mentioned eclipse season closing up. So when is that officially over, and what is the flavor or energy of that?
Well, with the eclipses, we had a solar eclipse on October 14th, and we had a lunar eclipse on the 28th, just a couple of days ago. That was the full moon in Taurus, and then the solar eclipse was the new moon in Libra. And eclipses often stir up energy. They're like polarities or portals, because they involve the sun and the moon aligning, close to the nodal axis. And that's the lunar nodes, the north and south nodes of the moon. And when we have a full moon or new moon, a lunation close to the nodes are like portals. They're like vortexes that jump through the time-space continuum that manifest things physically and real. And so I think that, and sometimes they take weeks or even months to fully manifest, but it's like the catalysts are over and there's still manifestation to occur. But I think that largely coming out of these eclipses, I think that we will look back and see some things that have occurred, through the month of October. That even though we're like still so close to the full moon, the full moon, meaning the lunar eclipse, was in Taurus, and as this week begins in October, on October 30th, the moon just moves out of Taurus and into Gemini at 8 a.m. this morning. That's Pacific time, so you need to adjust your time zones accordingly. And so as the moon moves into Gemini out of Taurus, I think we might feel a little bit of almost like a sense of freedom on Monday. But it's kind of crazy because in astrology, and I know I get tired of saying this, it's like standing in the ocean when the tide is going in, when the tide is coming in, and yet you feel on every wave the backwash, the undertow pulling you out. And so, although the moon is moving into Gemini on Monday morning early, at the same time as it moves into Gemini, Saturn, which is stationary, even though it's not, even though it hasn't technically turned direct, the moon squares Saturn. The moon from Gemini squares Saturn in Pisces. And so we feel this, there's finally movement, but maybe there's not, because Saturn is going to show its weight on Monday. And so I think Monday is kind of a tricky day, even though we are moving away from the eclipse. We still mid-morning on Monday. Maybe it's just Monday morning back to work. We have to pull in, we have to get real, we have to be responsible. But even early in the week, we're also feeling Venus, which is moving at a fairly good clip now through Virgo. Venus in Virgo makes a trine to Uranus, which is in Taurus, Earth to Earth. And so here we have a sense of practicality because it's Earth, but Venus trining Uranus is like, teasing us, tantalizing with forbidden fruit, with excitement, with something that we like that maybe we shouldn't, or maybe we never liked it. And now all of a sudden, our antenna go up. And so we're feeling that on Monday also, even though that's not exact until Tuesday. And again, even though we're feeling all of this, Saturn sits in the background saying, yes, but keep your feet on the ground. Keep that center of gravity, know what's real. And even if you're going to do something a little crazy or reach for some desire that maybe is a new or different or out of your normal range of experience, or even if you're going to make a bet, whether it's buying the lottery or going to Vegas or investing in a company, that Venus trine Uranus can really show us that there's something really exciting here, and it may turn out great. But as Venus moves on, it may also just be, oh, okay, that's done. Maybe this isn't you should or you shouldn't. It's just keep in mind that Saturn is sitting behind everything this week.
Okay. Anything else about Monday? Like, do you want to go through the day by day, or have we
No,
basically?
Monday is, I mean, it's the moon moving into Gemini, squaring Saturn. There's a bit of kind of an ill at ease feeling, and yet we're restless and we're moving. And again, with each of these kinds of things, like the moon moving into Gemini, um, it's tricky because I think astrologers, and I do this too. I mean, it's easy to fall into this trap saying, oh, the moon is moving into Gemini. So we're going to be curious and interested in a lot of things. And we might be, kind of a bit whimsical and maybe even but for some people, they resist that like crazy because some people's charts that just makes them crazy. And so they overreact and hold on tight. Whereas someone else, that might be a really cool thing. They've been waiting for the wind to blow to let up their kite and let the kite pull them up into the air. So, but Monday has a little bit of that restlessness to it. And yet we're still tethered to Saturn. And I think then Tuesday, the moon is in Gemini on Tuesday, all day. And I think that the most important thing on Tuesday is that Venus is exactly trine to Uranus. And then we also need to remember that through this period of time, through the whole week, we have the Sun, Mars, and Mercury in that order, all in Scorpio. And so as the moon is moving through Gemini, especially on late Monday and into Tuesday, the moon, as it's moving through Gemini, is making quincunxes with all those planets in Scorpio. And so, again, we might feel restless and we may feel like we want to go fly a kite, literally or figuratively. But those planets in Scorpio have an emotional hold on us that is making sure that we don't necessarily fly off the handle. Another thing on Tuesday, though, that is interesting is that Mercury, also in Scorpio, is on Tuesday. Mercury is making a quintile with Pluto. Now, here we get into those harmonic aspects, which I don't use a lot in mundane astrology. Mundane astrology being not the astrology of doing a birth chart, but what we do here in the weekly forecasts. That's the astrology that affects everyone. And although I don't usually do that, because the moon is in Gemini, Mercury, as the ruling planet of Gemini, is going to be a little more significant. And because it's making this quintile with Pluto, I think it stirs up stuff from the deep. And it gives us the ability to pull things from the underworld. The underworld that Pluto is associated with is really our unconscious. That is the underworld. It's everything that's not on the surface. And so as Mercury, and remember, traditionally, Mercury was the psychopomp. That was the planet who guides us in the journey between this world and the underworld. So as Mercury makes this quintile with Pluto later in the day on Tuesday, we'll be feeling it. And it's in a way giving us the ability to manifest, because the quintiles, five fingers on the hand, it's about making the metaphysical or the imaginal real. It's about bringing magic into the world. And so here I think that Tuesday, I think, can be a really cool day. It may be a bit annoying because we may not be able to get those things done that Saturn wants us to. That's a good thing to keep in mind. But we're kind of being pulled into these other dimensions by the Venus trine Uranus and the Mercury quintile Pluto.
Rick, have you seen Stranger Things?
Stranger Things than what? Or is that a movie that I have?
It's a series. It's a series on Netflix, I think. I would love to hear your thoughts on this show.
Okay, true confession. I've never watched anything on Netflix. I don't have a TV. It's like many years ago. It's like doing like Lent, where you give up something for 40 days. I gave up movies and TV 20 years ago. And I have watched a few things, but I mean, like maybe I've watched 3 or 4 or 5 movies in 20 years. And I know I miss some good shit. I mean, I don't watch TV, and I don't watch Hulu, and I don't watch TV, but on the internet, I can waste time as good as anyone. I mean, I can do a YouTube deep dive on some crazy rabbit hole and come out 3 hours later and go, oh my God, I forgot to eat dinner or whatever. So this is not a value judgment on people who do, but no, I haven't seen it. Although,
oh my God, there's a fun fact about Rick that I never knew. In all these years of working with you, I did not know this. This is fascinating. But now that I think about it, you don't refer to like movies or like, series and things like that. Anyway.
Well, it was when we invaded Iraq. We, not you and me, when we invaded Iraq, and I was watching the news and basically saw all these retired generals talking the party line. That's when I turned the TV off. And after I turned it off for a few days, I just gave it away. I don't.
Yeah, you didn't miss it. Yeah, I hear you. I wouldn't have watched
Still
this.
a news junkie though, just for the record.
I know you are. Yes, on the internet, obviously. My 12-year-old daughter, I would not watch this show if not for my 12-year-old daughter who loves it. But as you were talking about the quintile with Mercury and Pluto, right?
Yes.
Basically it's these kids that there's a portal that's been open to what they call the upside down,
Ah,
which is basically like this dimension, but then like upside down. And so it's real dark over there. It must be a play on the underworld. But I was just thinking of that show, and I wanted to see if you've seen it because it reminded me of that.
it
Yeah,
sounds like a more adult version of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
yeah,
or something of that sort, where we have the portal,
yes,
Or for those people who were into comics, as I was as a kid, Superman actually often had these encounters in Bizarro World. And in
Mm.
Bizarro World, everything was backwards from the way it is in this world.
So the bizarre world is that our unconscious? Is that the underworld? Is that, and it's just another dimension?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay,
Anyhow, yeah.
let's proceed. Wednesday.
So on Wednesday, first of all, by mid-afternoon, again, these are all Pacific times, by 2:30 p.m., the moon moves out of Gemini into Cancer. And so I think there's a big difference between Wednesday morning and Wednesday afternoon, not just because of the moon's change um, from this kind of moving and curious and interactive Gemini and more into a holding, receptive, more emotional, more feeling oriented. The moon gains power in Cancer, but again, for some people that may be uncomfortable and they choose to suppress, or maybe that energy is just naturally repressed. And for someone else, they're ready to go and do that emotional deep dive. But in the morning, while the moon is still moving through Gemini, the moon is squaring Venus and Neptune, which are coming into an opposition that's exact on Friday. So here we're going to just do a touch of foreshadowing because this is the way astrology really works in motion. Things don't just happen. We get that kind of something happens, but we don't really necessarily notice it. And then 3 days later, it happens and it's a little bit stronger. You go, oh my God, and then a week later, it's like, whoa, and so it's often these rhythms within rhythms. And so as the moon is moving through mid-late Gemini, it squares the moon squares. This is on November 1st. And of course, for those of you who are having hangovers from the costumes that you wore the night before, that really weren't costumes, they were really your true nature, and now you're trying to fit back into reality. As the moon squares Venus at just past midnight, and it squares Neptune by 5:30 in the morning, again Pacific time, there's this feeling that something odd is going on. And again, it can be like a portal, but it's more like it's confusing because we can't tell what's real and what's not real. And remember, Venus is still close enough to Uranus in that trine that we talked about from yesterday, from Tuesday. Venus is still active from that kind of like magnetized, electrified in its intensity. And now as the moon squares it from one side, and then from the other side, the moon squares Neptune, we may kind of get lost in what our imagination is. And yet by mid-afternoon, as the moon moves into Cancer, what it does at that time, because Saturn, remember, ain't moving, and Saturn's at 0 degrees of Pisces. So when the moon moves into Cancer, it trines Saturn and poof, reality check. But this is not a bad one because the moon is trining Cancer. So for those of us who can listen to our feelings, can drop down out of that noisy, head stuff of the moon in Gemini, by Wednesday afternoon, I think we get a bit of a reality check that can feel really good and help us put our feet back on the ground without necessarily leaving our emotions aside. That's Wednesday. By Thursday, the moon moving now through Cancer. Remember, I said earlier that we have the sun, Mars, and Mercury all moving through Scorpio. And so as the moon is moving through Cancer, it first goes into Cancer and it trines Saturn in Pisces. Moon, Cancer, water, Saturn, Pisces, water. So as the moon moves through the middle of Cancer, and this would be on November 2nd, on Thursday, the moon is going to trine the sun at 9:22. Just you can take 9:30 in the morning. It's then going to trine Mars by 7 in the evening. And in fact, it'll then by Friday morning, early in the morning, 3:49 a.m., it'll trine Mercury. And in fact, the moon is making these trines and sextiles to all the planets in water and earth. So the moon is going to, on Thursday and Friday, trine the sun, sextile Jupiter, trine Mars, trine Mercury, sextile Uranus, sextile Venus, trine Neptune. Woo! This is like a sweet moon, unless we're really uncomfortable with our feelings, in which case this can really be difficult and mess us up, because this is going to be a soulful, emotional, feeling opportunity. And on the 2nd, on Thursday, as the moon is making those first trines, first with the sun and then with Mars, we're going to really feel it. But here's where it gets tricky. And this is why the theme for the week is keep your feet on the ground, keep grounded, keep centered, because the sun, as it's moving through the middle, it's actually at about 10 degrees of Scorpio by Thursday, the sun is going to make a square and a half. Oh, we're back to harmonic aspects, although many people use semi, half squares, and sesqui, 1.5 squares. Semi-square is 45 degrees, half of 90, and a sesqui square is a square and a half is 135 degrees. And these are not weak squares. They're as powerful, maybe even more powerful than squares, but they're like laser beams. They're more focused. They're narrower. A square, anything that comes within range kind of gets lost in that conflict, in that kind of trying to work it out, the creative resolution of things that aren't working. And so the sun by midday on Thursday makes a square and a half to Neptune. And remember, Venus is still moving toward that opposition to Neptune. That's tomorrow. So we're getting all of this kind of like imagination, dreamy stuff. This is also fake news. I mean, maybe all news is fake news, and we're not going down that rabbit hole. But the point here is that as Venus is moving toward its opposition to Neptune, that's exact tomorrow on Friday. We're still on Thursday. The sun making a square and a half to Neptune at the same time is kind of, again, exacerbating this what's real and how do I feel? And if what I feel feels real, does that make it real? And at the same time, we have Jupiter moving into a half square with Neptune. So let me just play this back. We have this Venus moving toward this opposition with Neptune, opposition, tug of war. We have the sun moving toward an opposition with Jupiter, another tug of war. But if we go around that, these two tugs of war, we have the sun opposing Jupiter and Venus opposing Neptune, but the sun to Neptune, to Jupiter, to Venus, back to the sun are all half squares and squares and a half. And so this is rattling our cages. That's messing us up because we are drawn towards something. Our values are brought into us. Venus, where we are liking something, we're attracted to it, and yet it may be unreal. On Thursday, the sun makes that exact square and a half to Neptune, and that's mid-afternoon, 2:30 Pacific time. But by 10 p.m., the sun is exactly opposed Jupiter, which is like the ultimate magnifying glass, except we're not holding the magnifying glass. That would be a sun conjunct Jupiter. We're actually, everything out there is making our world seem bigger. There's that tug of war that oppositions are. We're in the middle. We can think of conjunctions being compression, like the sun, Mars, and Mercury all in Scorpio. That's pushing on us, and they're all trying to get into the same place. That's making us smaller. But whenever we have an opposition, that's stretching us and making us bigger. And in fact, we can only go so far. And in an opposition, if I look one way, I'm not seeing the other way. If I look the other way, I'm not seeing the first way. And a basic rule of psychology is that if we're not looking at something and it's invisible, we tend to project it. This is why oppositions are often felt in relationships, why relationships are fed by oppositions, because when there's an opposition, it's pulling away from the center like a tug of war. And so the sun opposing Uranus, the sun in Scorpio is go in, go deep, be powerful, focus that energy. And Jupiter in Taurus is methodically grow it and make it bigger. And we can't manage both of them at the same time. But at the same time, the sun and Neptune is also kind of exacerbating it. And what's intriguing about this, because this it's, one of the configurations is a mystic rectangle where you have a trine, a sextile, a trine, and a sextile, and the crisscrossing planets are in opposition. This is like that, except instead of trine, sextile, trine, sextile, it's a square and a half square, a square and a half square. And so it's still a rectangle that's a symmetrical pattern, but the planets that are involved are the sun, Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune. Now, Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune all have something in common, and that is that they're all in some ways ameliorating. They're all they're less magnetic than they are field oriented. They're expansive. Venus isn't really considered to be expansive, but it's love, and love is expansive, And so what we're moving here also toward is an exact half square to Jupiter Neptune, which is sitting behind the entire week. And Jupiter and Neptune are intriguing because I actually think they're the same planet. Now, I know that's a bit of heresy, and they're not. I'm just making a point here. But Neptune is Jupiter in drag. Neptune is Jupiter. You see, Jupiter is expansive, but it can only grow to Saturn because Saturn is the limit. Now remember, Saturn's ruling the roost this week. Jupiter, like a balloon that you blow up, you get to that point, if you blow it anymore, pop. Jupiter can't expand beyond the limit of Saturn. Jupiter is the big idea, but it can't go outside the law. Saturn. Jupiter has to answer to dad, the authority, the teacher, Saturn. Neptune is Jupiter that's escaped from Saturn. There's nothing holding Neptune back. I mean, Jupiter is philosophy because you have to rationalize and justify to stay inside the real realms of Saturn. Neptune says, screw all that. I can go to the outer edges of the universe and I don't have to justify or rationalize anything. So now we have Jupiter and Neptune in a half square, and this Jupiter-Neptune half square is exact on Friday. Again, this Thursday and Friday, we have the sun a square and a half to Neptune and the sun opposed Jupiter. That's on Thursday. And on Friday, we have Venus opposing Neptune and Venus a square and a half to Jupiter. And this is crazy making. Unless you're, unless you have a life where you can basically, get high and make music, which is actually a great thing to do during this transit. And I'm not suggesting that anyone should go out and do that. We're all adults and need to manage our own beings however we do. And in fact, Neptune certainly, and this Jupiter, Neptune, Venus exacerbation or stimulation with the sun certainly can be a overindulge. It can be a too much. It can be, if one sip of wine is really nice, well, I might as well drink the whole bottle. And I'm not making light of any of this. This stuff can be dangerous, but it also, if we keep our feet on the ground, our imagination is working overtime here. And if we can figure out a way to bottle it, this is massive creativity. But creativity can feel stressful when we're trying to keep our feet on the ground. So that's Thursday, and really Thursday and Friday, because remember, while we're being kind of yanked and bent out of shape by this Sun, Neptune, Jupiter, Venus, at the same time, the moon going through Cancer is going, I'm just trining and sextiling everything. This is okay. So it's a very interesting couple of days, Thursday and Friday, and I'm intrigued. I'll be interested to hear people's stories come the end of the week, because this is a pretty powerful thing. And again, here, just as not so much as an advertisement for the class, but it's so easy to miss something this powerful if you are not fishing for half squares, semi-squares, and sesqui-squares. And yet this is absolutely dynamic and absolutely powerful. By Friday evening, these things have all culminated. They've all reached their exactness, and they don't go away all that quickly. I mean, there is a dropping off, but on Friday evening at 8:27 p.m. Pacific time, so that's 11:27 New York time, and wherever else you are, you need to adjust accordingly. But as the moon is moving through latter degrees of Cancer, it's going to oppose Pluto, which is at 28 degrees of Capricorn. And so on Friday night at about 8:30 Pacific time, we basically get another reality check, but it's not just reality, it's intensity, it's power. It goes back to the power of the Scorpio planets, because the moon opposing Pluto kind of just brings our awareness to all that stuff that may be coming out, or all the stuff that's not on the surface. And remember also that at just 2 minutes after midnight tonight, Friday night, or actually 2 minutes into Saturday, Pacific time, that's the moment of Saturn stationary direct. Realizing that from the previous Saturday, a week ago, Saturn has not moved barely 1/60th of a degree, although technically now it's stationary and begins to move direct, even though all the astrologers in the world who say, Saturn's moving direct, everything's going to loosen up. Bullshit. It'll take days, weeks for us to feel the movement of Saturn moving forward, even though it technically turns direct or stationary direct on Friday night or early Saturday morning. And so the moon's opposition to Pluto and Saturn's station, I think, is significant. And the other thing that happens, again, either late Friday night or early Saturday morning, but that happens at 12:20 a.m. on Saturday morning, is that the moon, after it opposes Pluto, enters Leo. And now the energy kind of moves outward theoretically. And I think the moon's movement into Leo will be more noticeable than some of these other things that are still lingering and yanking our imagination off into the, it's like the Starship Enterprise exploring realms that have never, that we've never been in, that are kind of out there. And Saturday, we have another interesting switch and another flavor change, because as the moon moves into Leo, we begin to manifest creatively what's on the inside. There's more action oriented here than there is internal feelings and emotions. And yet, what also happens on Saturday, November 4th, which is a big day because Saturn is absolutely stationary, even though it's kind of for practical purposes, been stationary all week. The moon moves into Leo. The energy begins to move outward. Mars makes a quintile with Pluto. And again, the quintiles are magical. Earlier in the week, we had Mercury making its quintile with Pluto. And that was on Tuesday. And that was intellectual mental. And as the planets move through that 16-degree point of Scorpio, first Mercury, then Mars, and then early next week, which I'm not allowed to talk about because that'll be covered by someone else who probably won't cover the quintiles, that the sun will eventually move through that same point. That will actually be on Wednesday, November 8th, when the sun does. And so we're getting this play of expression of energy. And on the 4th, when Mars makes that quintile to Pluto, what was mental and intellectual earlier in the week when Mercury quintiled Pluto now is going to be physical. And Mars-Pluto is a dynamic and powerful combination because in a way they're playing the same game. It's almost like, Mars as the traditional ruler of Scorpio and Pluto as the modern ruler of Scorpio. It's almost like if Mars and Pluto get into a fight, chances are Mars will knock Pluto out on the first hit. But if it doesn't, Pluto will always win. And this is why in a battle between Aries and Scorpio, if Aries doesn't win on the first strike, and it doesn't even have to be physical, it can be an argument. And if Mars or Aries doesn't win on that first strike, Scorpio has the staying power and it will always win. And here we have this Mars in Scorpio, in its traditional domicile at home, making a quintile with its other ruler or modern planet associated with Scorpio in a quintile. And again, this can be magic. This can be manifesting those things from the deep, the unseen worlds that are very, very powerful. And on the same day, and by the way, that Mars quintile Pluto is exact at 6:49 a.m., but we're going to be feeling it all day. And the same day, just a couple of hours, 3 hours later, 2.5 hours later, Mercury opposes Uranus. Remember, Uranus received a trine from Venus early in the week. That was exciting. We want something new and different. Now, as Mercury opposes Uranus, we can find ourselves in an argument or a discussion where things are said that maybe we shouldn't say. Or maybe we should say them because it's the lightning striking that releases or relieves the tension that was hidden, that brings things out into the open. So November 4th is a very, very powerful day with Saturn absolutely stationary, meaning that the things that are happening now are really significant and important. And the last thing I want to mention about Saturday, the November 4th, is that there are 6 septiles, again, which I don't normally bring into this kind of conversation, except it's so overwhelming to have that many septiles on one day, where the moon is making, and a septile is 1/7 of a circle. Remember, quintiles are about metaphysical becoming real. It's the spiritual, it's charisma, something happening on the surface that seems like a talent, like a natural magic, but it's coming from someplace that's non-physical. Septiles are harder to manifest. I always think of David Bowie as a classic septile person because it's alien, otherworldly, unnatural, and it can't hold its place in the three-dimensional world. It comes flashing through in moments of intensity. Beethoven's chart has a lot of septiles, and the power of Beethoven, and septiles can be incredibly powerful. Dane Rudhyar called the septiles the aspect of fate. And we have the moon making a septile. And when I say septiles here, which is 1/7 of a circle, I really mean all of the septile series, the 1/7, 2/7, and 3/7. And they don't come out evenly. Septiles can be confusing because there are about 51 and a quarter degrees and maybe about 103 degrees and about 154 and a half, but they're not decimal numbers. You can't divide 7 into 360. It never comes out evenly. It doesn't, it's like pi. You can take it to as many places as you want. So we have the moon making this seventh harmonic aspect to Venus and to Saturn, and to the nodal axis, to the north node, and to Mercury, all in one day, while the sun is making a 3/7 triseptile to Chiron, and Venus is making a triseptile to Saturn, which is stationary. Now, I know these sound like a lot of confusing words, but if you just hear septile, 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 biseptile, triseptile, septile, septile, just know that Saturday is going to be a strange, what you said earlier about stranger than something,
Stranger
that, say again,
Strange things.
stranger things. That's Saturday. Saturday is a day when things can crash through from the other side. This is the day quintiles open portals, but you know what comes through? A five-pointed rose, because a rose is a five-pointed star that's rounded and it's beautiful. Quintiles are based upon the five-pointed star, which is the golden mean, the divine proportion. It's Venus, it's beauty. And here we have instead the complicated seven-pointed star that doesn't manifest physically. It's complicated. And so we have on Saturday kind of like a crescendo of the week, because Saturday is a bit crazy and it can be very intense, and things can happen and we cannot, I was going to say we cannot know why. We can know why, but we can, it can be difficult to understand why. That's what I'm trying to say. Because again, it's almost like Dane Rudhyar said, it's fate. And fate is just things that happen that are not integrated into our psyche. That's what fate is. And so, even when something happens that's fateful, it's not on the outside. It just seems that way. It's still part of our chart, part of our being. And so I'm looking at Saturday as kind of a really intriguing day. And in fact, Thursday, Friday, Saturday is a real crescendo. And by the time we get to Sunday, it's almost the after effect. But on Sunday, that's the exact Jupiter half square to Neptune that I mentioned earlier. But Jupiter and Neptune are both moving so slowly that half square is around all week. And when Jupiter, the planet of expansion, makes a half square to Neptune, again, all week, the planet of expansion with no limit, it's like we may take things too far. And so, again, with Saturn stationary, I think it's important to just keep ourselves focused on what is real. And by the way, just make a mental note, at least in the United States, on Saturday night at 2 a.m., it's standard time. We fall back. We turn the clocks back an hour. That's not an astrological thing, but if we don't pay attention to it, then if I tell you that the moon is making a few squares later in the day on Sunday, the moon is squaring Mars and squaring Uranus and squaring Mercury, and I tell you that the moon squares Mars at 9 a.m. and it squares Uranus at 6:11 p.m. and it squares Mercury at 11:25 p.m. This is the moon in Leo squaring all those planets in Scorpio. You'll be off an hour unless you've set your clocks back. So that's why it's important to know that we have that shift on Sunday, and that brings us through to the end of the week. It's a very powerful and crazy week, and I really think that the dance is going to be a dance of dreams, imagination, and what can be those the ability to see past what is real and to see that there is reality through those portals without losing the fact that if we don't keep our feet on the ground, whatever that means metaphorically or literally for you, that if we just float off, then we'll lose our effectiveness and we won't be as we'll lose the ability to make use of all of this stuff.
Mm. I love how you said earlier that we need to be able to bottle it up. Like there could be insights, there could be expansive imagination and downloads or whatever you want to call it. But if we can't ground it, if we can't contain it, it's sort of just wasted. So this is an opportunity really to how can we I love how you always talk about the scaffolding. Like how can we create scaffolding around the visions or around the imagination?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, Neptune's job is to create, to allow us to create that scaffolding that Saturn then builds reality on. People go, oh, that's just a dream or that's just an illusion. But that's what Saturn builds itself on. It needs the dream or the illusion. And Freud points out very, very accurately that illusions are based upon wish fulfillment or fear. In other words, we create something in our mind's eye, whether it's out of something we want or something we don't want. And sometimes the what we don't want creates as strong, the scaffolding it creates can be as strong as the scaffolding of what we want. This is why Saturn can manifest either way and why we always have to pay attention to fear. Remember, Neptune, people sometimes forget that Neptune is not only the planet of dreams and illusion and imagination and creative imagination and spirituality, but it's also the planet of delusion and confusion. And the word confusion is a word that people don't like. I don't want to be confused. Oh, yeah? Well, I do. Why? Because confusion means with Greek con, fusion, coming together or melting together. And there's an appropriate time to be confused. Love. Love melts the illusion of our separateness. The ego, I appear to be separate from you. But if I love you, then that boundary is not as strong. And the spiritual side of Neptune and Jupiter, for that matter, as the ancient and modern ruling planets of Pisces, that reminds us that it is an illusion to think that we are separate. I always think of the Beatles, I am you as you are me, as we are all together, goo goo gajoob. That's Neptune and Jupiter having dissolved the illusion of separateness. Confusion is often the first step on a spiritual journey because as long as I'm separate, I have this illusion that the three-dimensional world is real. But if something happens and I become confused, I lose my sense of boundary. And that often is the first step on a spiritual journey. So we have that cooking this week, but it's a mixed blessing because because if we stay in our ego, the ego becomes afraid of losing its perspective, losing its boundary, and fear manifests scaffolding that Saturn's very happy to build our worst nightmare on. And yet, if we remind ourselves that fear is an illusion, and I'm not saying there's never a time to have fear because manifesting fear is also a lifesaver. In a certain situation that fear can create that flight response that may in fact save our lives. So I'm not just saying it's all one or another, but it's a tricky dance this week because Saturn is in Pisces, where Saturn doesn't have as much reality as it does in some other signs, because in Pisces, Saturn's hard edges are kind of melted away into the cosmic sea of consciousness or the oceans of Earth. And so Saturn doesn't quite hold the reality that it was holding when it was in Capricorn or in Aquarius.
Mm. Okay. So a few highlights from everything you just said. This week, the weight of the world gets heavier. It's important to keep our feet on the ground. What you mean by that is paying attention to what's real, take care of business, be in integrity. We're also at a turning point that because the eclipse season is over, there were catalysts that happen in October. Like we'll be able to look back at we may not see all the manifestations of it yet, but there were definite turning points in October.
Yeah.
And we're going to be seeing things that occur. We're going to be seeing the seeds that were planted then start manifesting, not necessarily this week, but over the next few months. Thursday, Friday, Saturday are like the big 3 days of the week where there's just kind of this crazy. If you haven't seen Stranger Things, although it's scary, like, wow, I have this daughter who was so deathly afraid of the dark for the first like 11 years of her life. All of a sudden, watching this Stranger Things, and it's I mean, it's scary to me. If I hadn't even known she was watching it, I would never said, okay. However, she's watching these kids face their fears, and she's finding her own courage and bravery through their escapades, which is actually pretty amazing. But so don't
Well, and
allow.
that's part of the magic of the Mercury trine Pluto, because things are Pluto's realms in the unconscious. That's when things have power over us. When we don't know, when we can't work with them. This is what therapy is all about. Talk therapy is sending Mercury into the underworld to recover those things that are hidden so that we can talk about them and then face our demons and face our fears, because they're never, even if they're horrible, they're never as horrible when we actually face them and work with them as they are when they're unknown.
Amazing. Wow. Well, this is exactly what my daughter's been going through. It's interesting. She says every character in the show is mean until they meet the monster. After they meet the monster, they become kind and compassionate and helpful. I was like, wow, that's an interesting metaphor for life. I mean, in general,
Yeah.
it's humbling and you kind of have a different appreciation for life. Yeah. Okay. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, kind of nuts. Don't get lost in those outer realms. Keep your feet on the ground. See if you can harness some of the insights, the imagination, the breakthroughs that you might be having at that time. Um, yeah, creative opportunities, things happening now are significant and important. So, whatever the storyline is in your life, it's significant and important. And things may be crazy and intense, and it can be difficult to understand why, but it's fate. It's things that we haven't yet integrated.
Integrated. And,
Yes.
there's one other thing that I didn't mention that I would be remiss if I didn't, and that is very early on Sunday morning, which means this is also going to be part of that craziness on Saturday, that Mars moving through Scorpio makes an exact quincunx with Chiron in Aries. Now, again, in some ways, this is Mars Pluto again, because it's Mars in Scorpio and Chiron in Mars's home sign of Aries. And again, this has to do with those things, those lessons that maybe we didn't learn in the past because they were too painful or they hurt. The Chiron, and because it's Mars, it's an emotional, maybe even a physical wound or illness or sickness, that it doesn't mean that we're going to be sick. It means that we have a chance to look at those things that have been irritations that have been severe at times in our life, that we may be able to move through now as Saturn makes its station direct, and as that Jupiter, Neptune are kind of tweaking us to use the imagination maybe for positive things. I'm sorry I didn't mention that before.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. If you love Rick's astrology, if you want to learn more about harmonic aspects, make sure you check out his upcoming class, astrologyhub.com/harmonic. This is a very interactive class. This is going to be some teaching, lots of demonstration, lots of practice, lots of real life examples. So he's bringing it to life in a really big way.
Yeah, we're
Uh,
going to be doing 4 charts each week of people who are registered for the class. If you're registered for the class, then your chart has a chance of being one of the 4 charts. There'll be 16 charts, 4 weeks,
yes.
16 charts that we'll be doing as the curriculum of the course, actually.
So cool. Love it. Hope to see you all there. Rick, thank you so much. I feel like really ready to face this week. Lots of opportunity, lots of places where we can kind of fall off the path, but we have that anchor to bring us back.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Thanks all of you for tuning in. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. As always, thank you for making astrology a part of your life.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Amanda.
So, thank you, Rick. Take care.
The entirety of our known universe, from the subatomic microcosmic level to the galactic macrocosmic level, is all built upon the blueprint of sacred geometry. Everything in the cosmos is made up of the sacred geometrical laws that bring reality into existence. You know, traditionally, we astrologers look at these patterns through a 12-fold system based on 12 signs of the zodiac. However, dividing a cycle by 12 is not the only way that nature works. It's just a very convenient way for us to mathematically divide a circle by 2, 3, 4, or 6, which, of course, creates the traditional aspects all astrologers know well. Unfortunately, this patriarchal bias prompts us to miss a lot of the action when we divide a circle by the magical 5, or the otherworldly division by the number 7, or even the motivational number 8, in order to widen our astrological thinking. So we can make invisible worlds visible. We're going to look at quintiles, the division by 5, septiles, the division by 7, octiles, called semi-squares and sesqui-squares. That's the division by 8, and even more. Hey all, this is Rick Levine, and I'm excited to be announcing my latest course, Unlocking the Magic of Harmonic Aspects. This, as some of you know, is one of my favorite astrological topics, and I'm quite pleased to be teaching this on the Astrology Hub. Although the course actually includes a 1-hour introductory video that's a crash course in harmonic aspects for anyone unfamiliar with them, it's also a refresher for those who have already studied some of these aspects. But the course is not a course on theory. It's a hands-on practical application of harmonic aspects for natal chart interpretation. I'm going to be reading 4 charts per class in 4 2-hour live Zoom webinars, meaning that 16 lucky students will be chosen in advance and will be brought on screen to have me analyze, to unfold their harmonic aspects, revealing things about charts that maybe these people have never had put into words in an astrological session. So I invite you to come along on a mind-expanding ride and take a next step into your astrological studies. More information, details on the curriculum, and registration is available at astrologyhub.com/harmonics. I'm Rick Levine. See you online.